So we were taking yesterday a look at the what is known as the India-China dispute, right? India-China border and the areas surrounding the India-China border with regard to the activities which are happening in this particular time, right? Now, in India-China border, we have seen, for example, very simply, that this region, which is known as Tibet, this region which is known as Tibet is basically the problem between India and China. And the real problem between India and China, as we have identified yesterday, is the boundary that India has with Tibet. Okay, and that is the interpretative problem, meaning the way that the Chinese and the Indians give different interpretations to the boundary with Tibet. That is the question that we are currently stuck at. The Chinese have the claim upon Tibetan region. So just imagine something like this. Then let's say, for example, if this is what the Chinese call the line of actual, what the let's say this is what Indians call the Johnson line, and this is what the Indians call the McMahon line, right? So Johnson line is what you can understand as a kind of a area in the western sector. I think I had shown you the map yesterday, western sector, and McMahon line is the area which is known in the eastern sector. Right now, the Chinese say basically that the western sector, the eastern sector, let's say for example, this is the state of Jammu and Kashmir entirely, right? Which means that this part known as the region of Ladakh is a part of Indian territory according to the McMahon line, meaning according to the Jensen line, that this lies on the Indian side, right? And this part, Arunachal, also is a part of the Indian territory. This lies on the Indian side. So this is the line that India proposes, known as the Johnson line and the McMahon line. The Chinese claim that the Johnson line should be altered in such a way that this area and this area, okay, this should be a part of the Chinese territory. So basically, very simply, Indian line is configured as this one, the one which is running in red. This is the Indian line, right? And the Chinese line is the one which is running in orange. This line in orange is what is known by the Chinese as the line of actual control, and therefore it is from there that the Chinese have, in a way, taken a cue of understanding how the Indian and the Chinese interpretations of these borders are different. So naturally, the Chinese are going to lay a claim upon this area. They will lay a claim upon the Aksai Chin region over here, and they will lay a claim upon the Arunachal region over here. Okay, this is basically how the Chinese have been, deciphered in this sense, to lay a claim upon the region of Arunachal, Aksai Chin, and to lay a claim upon the region of Arunachal. This is what the Chinese have been, in a way, creating with difficulties for India about, right? So we understand the Johnson line, the McMahon line, and the line of actual control. Now, just to give you a sense of what we were yesterday discussing as the McCartney McDonald line. So I hope this part is clear to you. If I have to, in a way, stitch it out for you very clearly, we understand that the line which is connecting, class, take a look at this line which is connecting this entire region over here. right? So from the line which is joining this entire region of Ladakh and Uttarakhand, this is the Johnson line, right? And the line which is here, this is the McMahon line, the line which runs from Bhutan to Myanmar. This is the McMahon line. Now the Britishers had, what they had done is they'd taken this area into their control from the Tibetan plateau. They'd taken this area into control from the Tibetan plateau. These were the two areas which were controlled by the Britishers with regard to the, you know, color which was given to the Tibetan plateau. So this entire region was considered a part of the Tibetan plateau, and that is what also makes the Britishers claim certain territories in Bhutan and Nepal also in the northern parts. So they called this entire region a Tibetan plateau, and they wanted to cut it out for India, calling the LAC. So while the in 1865, when you had the creation of what is known as the, so if you take a look at this map over here, you can see how the claims of the Chinese and the Indians differ with respect to this part, right? So you have, very simply speaking, the creation of this thing which we call the McMahon line, and this is what the Chinese claim. So this is what the status of Arunachal is today, administered by India but claimed by China. And they claim Arunachal as a part of the territory of Tibet, which extended till this point, which the Chinese call the line of actual control. So the disputed territory with regard to Arunachal exists for India in this particular area. Now, if you see this map over here, this is the part of the area in Kashmir. Okay, so let's say, let me mark this out. This is what is called the Johnson line. You understand this now perfectly well. This is the Johnson line. This is the line which is marked by the Chinese as the line of actual control. This is the Chinese claim as their own territory, marking it as the line of actual control. Right. Now it happens to be the case that while the Britishers had marked the Johnson line in 1865, 1867 it was finalized, the Chinese at the time had protested against the Britishers. The Chinese had registered certain protests against the Britishers in terms of marking this line uh, as a part of the Chinese territory, as a part of the Indian territory. So they registered a protest against the Johnson line. As you can see automatically that this area is what we call claimed by the Chinese as a part of being the Tibetan plateau. Okay. Now, as a response to this, the Chinese, demands and protests, the Britishers proposed another line by which they agreed to retreat slightly backwards. Okay, you see this line over here, the one which is going in red. The Britishers agreed to, in a way, create a line slightly backward, and they said, okay, ठीक है, if you're not agreeing with Johnson line, we'll retreat the line slightly, and they created what is known as the McCartney-McDonald line. Now, this was the line which was known as the McCartney-McDonald line, was a kind of a truce which was offered by the Britishers to the Chinese in the 19th century, till which the Britishers said, okay, ठीक है, we'll take our positions over here, you take your positions over there. Okay, so the Chinese claimed territory till here, Britishers marked territory till here, and a kind of a middle path was proposed by the Britishers, which was known as the McCartney-McDonald line. But this middle path was never chosen by the Chinese. Chinese never agreed, or they gave a understanding of the McCartney-McDonald line. They never accepted the position of the McCartney-McDonald line. So the McCartney-McDonald line is just a proposition which was given by the Britishers at the time when the Chinese were protesting against the creation of the Johnson line. And as a response to it, the Chinese did not say yes or no. They maintained complete silence over what they want to do with regard to this particular line, right? And the most important part about this was that when the Chinese did not accept the McCartney-MacDonald line. In 1962, it was open for the Chinese to reclaim their territory till the line of actual control, right? So the Chinese silence is not accepting the McCartney-MacDonald line benefited them when they did not have a signed agreement in which they accepted the McCartney-MacDonald line, and they took the entire territory back with regard to the 1962 war. So this line, which is standing in the middle in the western sector as an opposite, let's say, perspective to the Johnson line, is known as the McCartney-MacDonald line, right? This is basically what we take a look at in these capacities and understanding. Are we clear? Class, does it make sense to you? So we are discussing, uh, we were taking a look at the entire India-China issue, and we are going to take a look at the entire India-China issue with the perspective of very simple understanding of what is known as the Johnson line plus McMahon line, and also the proposed line known as the McCartney-MacDonald line. Now, McCartney-MacDonald line is very simply the alternate line which existed in the western sector, but it was only a proposal, never accepted by the Chinese. Okay, this was in the western sector. Sometimes this has also been, in a way, told as a kind of a suggestion to solve the problem between the Chinese and the Indians, but nonetheless, this is what the simple understanding of the McCartney-MacDonald line is. And as opposed to this, you take a look at what is known as the line of actual control, LAC. Okay, right. So if you take a look at some maps further on, you can see this map here, Arunachal Pradesh, McMahon line, and the, what you can say, the line of control, line of actual control. Now, if you take a look at this kind of a detailed map of Arunachal Pradesh over here, I'm going to mark certain areas which are going to be important. First is the Bumla Pass, the Bumla, Bumla Pass. We are taking a look at what is known as the Bumla Pass, which is the way by which, when in 1962, when the Chinese army attacked India, they came to India by what is known as the Bumla Pass, right? So it is the pass which is stationed at the India-China border, which allowed the Chinese military to move inside Arunachal in 1962, even if it is currently today the most militarized point between India and China. Because in a possibility of a Chinese attack upon India, it is likely that this attack will happen from the Bumla Pass, because that is the passage which allows the Chinese forces to move inside this entire region, right? And the city that you see very clearly associated with the Bumla Pass is the city of Tawang. This is where you have Tawang. The Tawang is an important city for a few reasons. Okay, when the Dalai Lama came, when the Dalai Lama took exile in India in the 1959, 58, 59, the Dalai Lama had to flee the persecution of the Chinese forces and he had to take exile in India. He came from the same route. He came from the Bumla Pass and he came to the point of Tawang. The Tawang is, let's say, for example, the only site in the world today which has untouched traces of Tibetan cultural history. Tawang is the only site in the world today which has traces of untouched Tibetan cultural history. So you have monasteries. A very famous Dalai Lama was, his monastery is made in Tawang. And since Lhasa, LHASA, which used to be the original spot of Tibetan cultural ideas and identities has more or less been destroyed by the Chinese, and all the monasteries and all the religious places have been taken out by the Chinese. The only place which remains currently with regard to the activities of let's say for example, the only place that remains currently in a format which is having the potential of becoming the cultural center for the Tibetan Buddhists is Tawang, and Tawang can be directly accessed through the Bumla Pass. So even in 1962, the next thing that the Chinese entered after the Bumla Pass was the region of Tawang, right? So both of these areas are just standing at the edge of Arunachal, right? At the intersection over here, which is very close to the Bhutan border, right? The Bumla Pass and Tawang. These are two areas that we just might want to take a note of in terms of a geographical understanding. Why? Because one of the things that we see, for example, is that in 2022, the Chinese forces had launched a bit of an attack on Tawang. Okay, so it is, take a look at this. This is the article which came in the Hindu. Why Tawang matters, understanding its people, its geography, and its vital place in the history of India-China engagement over the past century. This is an article which came in the Hindu. In the backdrop, if you can take a look at the picturesque version of Tawang, take a look at this. A bird's eye view of the Tawang city of Arunachal Pradesh, which shares a border with China, where clashes between Indian and Chinese soldiers took place on December 9 in 2021. And in 2022, this was the clash that happened between the Indian and the Chinese soldiers. So that is where you can see the aerial version of Tawang. This entire region is the centerpiece of, what you can say, the questions about the Chinese claims upon India, etc., etc. In short, this entire territory is claimed by the Chinese as the most specific part of its security arrangement in controlling the Tibetan region. Okay, please take a look at this. It was in December 2022. The Tawang section in Arunachal Pradesh, sector in Arunachal Pradesh, where the clashes between Indian and Chinese soldiers took place on December 9, has long been a theatre for contentious border scuffles. It was the Tawang sector that the 1962 India-China war first began. It was also the last place where the ceasefire was implemented. The population here consists in mainly of Monpas, adherents of the Tibetan Buddhism, with a distinct local ethnic identity. With all the attention on the two militaries clashing, it is easy to forget the trauma that a border skirmish imposes on the local people. It is vital to note that the Tavangapas, as they call themselves, are the only Indian who have lived under foreign occupation after gaining independence from colonial rule. Right. So while the Chinese forces in 1962 had come till the point of controlling these areas, after that they had retreated. Right. So the Chinese had controlled the areas over here in Tawang, but later on they had retreated from these areas. So this is basically why I'm in a way giving to you a little bit of an understanding about the territory of Taiwan. 60 years ago in December 1962, the last Chinese soldiers actually left Taiwan after having occupied the area for almost 2 months. As the Chinese forces had advanced across the border, the Indian administration and the soldiers retreated towards Assam. The locals too tried to flee their homes, fearing that Chinese would visit the same wrath as they did on their Tibetan brethren. Those who could not leave spent the days in terror in the jungles as Chinese soldiers built camps in Monpa villages. Even today, every skirmish on the border rekindles the same sense of foreboding it did 60 years ago. Chief Minister of Arunachal, Pema Khandu, himself is a Tawangapa, and his statement after the December 9 clashes was aimed at allaying those fears. Yangtze is under my assembly constituency, and every year I meet the Javans and villagers of the area. It's not 1962 anymore. If anyone tries to transgress, our brave soldiers would give a befitting reply. The Arunachal border has seen increased military activity since the 2022 Ladakh standoff. Like in eastern Ladakh, the border areas in the Tawang sector to have seen a strengthening of border infrastructure. The Chinese action in Tawang comes as the Sela tunnel, meant for providing the Indian security forces an all-weather road to Tawang, is scheduled to be ready next year. Okay, take a look at this. Yangtze, the scene of the latest clashes where soldiers on both sides suffered minor injuries, lies between two high mountain passes, Bamla and Tulungla. Now, I'm going to identify this too for your prelims examination, please, class. Just take a look at this. Taking a look at the Yangtze between two high mountain passes, that is Bumla and Tulungla. Please note this. Why am I noting this? Because the last clash that happened between the Indian and the Chinese forces happened in this region in 2022, which is not very far from where today we stand. So the fact that these are the areas in which the most amount of the last kind of clash happened between the Indian and the Chinese forces is what becomes relevant in understanding this part. So I'm highlighting the portion of Tawang slightly important for you from a geographical international relations perspective. Okay, you can take a look at this part from here till here. Okay, so with regard to the India-China border areas, I'm going to specify a little bit more focused attention upon Tawang. Action has recently taken place in Tawang, and therefore we are going to just take a look at a highlighted history of how Tawang has been one of the most important areas in this particular activity. You see the defense minister over here addressing a gathering in Tawang with regard to, you know, laying India's claims in this particular region. So you can see how India is present in this region prominently, and the hills that you see on the other side of these hills, the Chinese forces are present. So we are at the most proximate with the Chinese in this area. Okay, right. So this is one part. Now we are going to take a look at. So this completes us, in way which we are going to take a look at the India-China border disputes in terms of understanding these parts clearly. These are areas of Bhutan. You can take a look at this map again. You can get a sense of what we are covering. I hope that this map is clearly understandable right now.